So why is this moving in the first place? How is this camera even doing this rotation? Where is that being controlled? So if I come to this animator tab, I can see I have this visual graphic of the animation that's happening. So on entry, which is when I hit play, once my computer starts running this simulation, it's going to then next play this animation called camera rotation here. And if I select this camera rotation, I can change things like the speed at which that animation plays. But how do I see what this animation actually is? In order to see those, I'm going to come to Window, Animation, and it's going to pull up a keyframe editor. So these are two windows that are named similarly but do fairly different things. So we have the animator, which is a flowchart of the animations that are running in my game, and then we have animation, that is a keyframe editor. And to see the animation that is running, I can select my main camera, and it'll show me I have two keyframes applied to this camera. And if I select this playhead, I can see the animations and how they're changing in the transform of my main camera here in the inspector. So I can pull this across and I can see that this camera is animating by rotating on the y-axis 360 degrees over the course of 60 seconds. So that's how that is moving, is that when I hit play, the animator is starting this animation called camera rotation, which is rotating the camera 360 degrees on the y-axis. That's great. Very cool. Very exciting. But what if you want to add your own animation to another one of these game objects? I might want to add an animation to something like the directional light. You might remember from the lighting, I added the directional light as the sun source of my environmental lighting in my scene. Now, to best demonstrate how this sun source works, I'm actually going to switch my skybox back to the default skybox. I'll put it back to our selected skybox in a second. With the default skybox selected, I'm going to select my directional light. And what I want to do is in my inspector, I'm going to change the rotation of this directional light, knowing that it's the sun source for my scene. So when I begin rotating this, you'll see that the rotation of the sun is actually controlling what the time of day of this scene is looking like. So I can go from something like a high noon to a sunset to a midnight just by rotating the sun source of my environmental lighting. So what I want to do is I want to add an animation to my sun source so that with the camera rotation, I'm also getting a sort of accelerated night-day cycle to my scene. So I'm going to add an animation by selecting my directional light, coming to the animation tab, and selecting create. This will bring up a finder menu where I am creating a new animation file in my scene. So I'm going to say sun source, and I'm going to select my animations folder, and I'm going to save that file into the animations folder. Now when I select my directional light and I come to my inspector, I can see it's added this animator component to that game object. So I want to change the rotation. So I'm going to add a property. I'm going to select transform rotation and go ahead and add that. And by default, it will give me two keyframes. A keyframe at the 0 position on the playhead on the timeline, as well as a keyframe that's 1 second later on the timeline. I'm going to increase the scale of this timeline by using the wheel on my mouse. And I'm going to scale it to, let's say, I want it to be like 30 seconds. I'm going to delete that second keyframe by selecting it and hitting delete on the keyboard. And then I'm going to find 30 on the playhead. And I'm going to change the direction X. So it's currently at -270. I want to start in a location that's a little bit easier to work with. So I'm going to move the playhead to the first frame. I'm going to change it from 270 to 0. So we're going to sort of start at this sunset position. Then at 30 seconds in, I'm going to create a new frame, a new keyframe where I'm going to put 360. And you'll see that when I have my cursor at the position on the timeline and then I manually change that value here, it's going to just automatically create that keyframe for me. I can also, rather than manually changing these values in the animation tab, I can click this record button, and that record button will allow me to change values either here in the inspector or visually in my scene by dragging these with the record button selected. And I can do something like drag my x-axis to something like 66, and then that will change. Okay, so let's go ahead and we're gonna deselect the record. I'm gonna go ahead and save my file as it is and then hit play. Very nice. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to come back to my lighting. I'm going to change the default skybox back to this crazy one. And I'm pretty happy with this so far. In terms of like a demo work file, I'm ready to test in getting this to display in the browser on GitHub pages. So the next tutorial video is going to go through exporting the scene and getting the configuration settings for GitHub up and running.